Chapter 4. Freemasonry. Next to the Illuminati, of whom they are closely associated with, no other society has spawned more rumors and allegations than the Freemasons. Ostensibly a fraternal organization devoted to charitable deeds, civic obligation, brotherhood, and the betterment of the individual, Freemasonry has wielded a considerable amount of power over political, economic, and social spheres over the past 300 years. How then did this strange amalgamation of disparate men, rooted in obscure ritual, pageantry, and secrecy, come to be known and reviled as the architects behind numerous revolutions, wars, and social changes? Yet, as the last chapter has shown, there has been considerable parallels and a mutually beneficial historical relationship between Freemasonry and the Illuminati. Virtually all of the founding fathers of the United States were indeed Freemasons, as has been ably documented elsewhere. In fact, virtually all presidencies have either been manned by Masons or included key cabinet members who were affiliated until the presidency of Abraham Lincoln, whose assassination is still subject to much speculation, and the influence of the Illuminati bears a striking resemblance to the US Constitution and Bill of Rights. Coincidence? Or is the institution of Freemasonry a training ground of sorts for Illuminati candidacy? As I mentioned in the introduction, unlike the clandestine nature of the Illuminati, Freemasonry may be the classic overt secret society. The origins of Freemasonry. The origins of Freemasonry, as Masonic apologists and authors are so fond of repeating, are forever lost to the sands of time, thereby grafting a highly dubious insinuation of ancient legacy upon the history of Masonic craft. How and why these mysterious legacies of ancient pedigree are so integral to Freemasonry may be largely a result of an unconscious need to equate longevity with relevance, a notion discarded with the sudden rise of successive institutions such as McDonald's or science fiction movies in the immediate years following WW2. Whatever the case may be, the first organized Masonic activity is generally held to be founded on June 24, 1717, with the assembly of the First United Grand Lodge of England. Prior to this, there were loosely organized guilds of what has come to be known as speculative Masonry. That is, loose affiliates of like-minded individuals forming a mutual aid society modeled after the stonemason guilds of the 13th and 14th centuries, in whom they found an ideal allegory for non-denominational religious beliefs and the interpretation of biblical parables as metaphors for both the universal brotherhood of man and historic allusions. Some of these guilds have been proven to be in existence as early as the 16th century, during which time the stonemason guilds had been officially abolished by Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, leader of the English Reformation, in 1548. But it wasn't until at least 150 years later that these guilds met to form a unified front. Over the next 70 years, Freemasonry began to grow considerably among all walks of life throughout Europe, petitioning as it did a relatively egalitarian ethos of brotherhood, justice, and labor. As the popularity of Freemasonry grew, so did the need to formalize established constitutions, dictates, and most famously, their degree structure and rituals. Space permits us from delving at all into the structure of these ritual or degrees, other than to state that they are rooted in biblical, classical, and Kabbalistic symbolism and historical allegory, including the introduction of the myth of the Knights Templar as introduced in Chapter 2, the meaning of which is revealed through successive degrees. As the popularity of Freemasonry migrated throughout both Europe and the New World, many of the leading ideologues of the time became enamored of its tenets, which held that the equality of all men was indeed a demonstrable fact, a parallel with the Hermetic axiom of as above, so below alluded to in this book's introduction. Frenchmen such as Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Voltaire, and Montesquieu, all leading figures of the Enlightenment whose philosophies would have an inestimable influence on the formation of the American Constitution, were confirmed Freemasons, as were American founding fathers such as Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and George Washington. In order to place the popularity of such secretive organizations in context, we should take into account that such movements served a twofold purpose. The first is to provide a relative harbour where such ideals could be championed and discussed openly without fear of reprisal from reigning political ideologies who saw egalitarianism as inimical to their very structure. The second is that of a social mechanism. Much like today, even intellectuals needed a place free of judgment where they could relax and enjoy the fellowship and camaraderie of like-minded individuals. One drastic, if relevant example would be the infamous Hellfire Club of Sir Francis Dashwood, of which Benjamin Franklin was known to be a member of a libertine society in the 18th century, consisting of both British aristocrats and commoners alike, that was said to harbour secret services of devil worship. Although in all likelihood this was just a colourful and poetic metaphor for perpetual drunkenness as opposed to legitimate satanic practices. As both the ideals and the popularity of Freemasonry continued to filter throughout both continents, so did its interaction with increasingly progressive thought, as well as existing Hermetic and Rosicrucian organizations, both of which shared common philosophical backgrounds. The need for a more inclusive attitude, as well as allowance for diversity of opinion and ritual, faced the various grand lodges throughout Europe and the Americas. In Freemasonry, freedom represented liberty and equality in all sectors of life, inasmuch as it demanded the worship of a supreme being whom Masons to this day refer to as the great architect of the universe. The free and accepted Mason swore to uphold and present himself according to these dictates. It's interesting to note that the Freemasons might be considered early pioneers of interfaith practices currently in fashion. The Masonic candidate was considered to be a seeker after light, and having found it metaphorically in the institution of Freemasonry, was expected to act as a similar beacon both to those in his community as well as his fellow Masonic brethren. It is well known that the leading anarchist theorist Mikhail Bakunin, who once wrote that the revolutionary must seek the unchaining of what is today called the evil passions and the destruction of what is called public order, was a member of one such lodge. He also called for the abolition of marriage, property, and the complete reversal of all social and religious institutions, a charge most commonly associated with the Illuminati. It is also well known that Bakunin enjoyed frequent meetings with Communist Manifesto author Karl Marx and was a direct influence on the February Revolution of 1848 and the Paris Commune Uprising of 1871, both of which sought to replace the French Republic with a more avowedly socialist design. Could it be that the spectres of communism and socialism that haunted much of the 20th century have their roots in Masonic ideals? In America, however, the noble ideals of equality and freedom, supposedly germane to Freemasonry, found their diametrical opposite in the Civil War and its twisted offspring, the Ku Klux Klan. Albert Pike, a Boston-born turned officer in the Confederate Army, was a top-ranking 33rd degree Freemason. This is the highest degree regular and accepted Freemasonry recognizes. He was also the author of the esteemed work Morals and Dogma of Freemasonry, which is replete with extensive references lauding the figure of Lucifer. Again, this is redolent of an uncanny parallel to the Illuminati. Pike, who would early on in his career pen hymns to unnamed pagan gods, also had a role in establishing the Ku Klux Klan, along with Nathaniel Bedford Forrest, who was himself a fellow Freemason. This secret society swore to uphold the rights of white citizenry and landowners from what they viewed as the threat from newly freed slaves. Perhaps more interestingly and tellingly were a series of letters Pike wrote in 1871 to a leading Masonic diplomat and politician named Giuseppe Mazzini. Mazzini was the organizer of an Italian political party named La Giovine Italia, which was devoted to the unification of the separate states and kingdoms across the Italian peninsula. Their slogan was One Independent Free Republic. In these letters, Pike predicts the coming of 3 separate world wars necessary to sow and foment interior conflicts, leading up to one great and inevitable social cataclysm, a trial by fire after which the doctrine of pure light and reason would reign, again signifying roots in Illuminati doctrine. Masonry had already been well established in Italy by the year 1877 and the formation of the Lodge Propaganda Massonica in Turin. After World War II, Freemasonry was all but dormant in Italy due to both the banning of Masonry by Mussolini's regime as well as the scrutiny of the Christian Democrat Party then in power. It is interesting to see how strong a hold Freemasonry took in Italy, given the notorious animosity between Masons and the Catholic Church. However, a renegade but recognized Freemason by the name of Liccio Gelli, known himself to show pro-fascist and Nazi sympathies, reconstituted the moribund lodge as Propaganda Due, or P2, in the late 1960s, outside the jurisdiction of the Grand Lodge of Italy. Within a matter of a few short years, Gelli was known to have influence over the highest echelons of Italian society, including the sovereign state of the Vatican. It has been shown that Gelli allied himself with the Vatican in the business of helping to harbor Nazi war criminals in hiding. In fact, Gelli's influence was so widespread that P2's influence began to be seen as a shadowy, secret government. They were virulently opposed to the Italian Communist Party, of whose members the lodge committed several notable kidnappings and subsequent murders. P2 was regularly supported by the governments of Brazil, Nicaragua, Uruguay and Argentina. Gelli repeatedly referred to Argentina's dictator, Juan Perón, as being his close, personal friend. When Gelli's personal list of P2 members was discovered in 1981 following the Vatican banking scandal, it was quite the revelation. The Vatican was accused of being the main shareholder of Banco Ambrosiano, a private bank that also operated as a money laundering source for various members of the mafia. This scandal left bank president and P2 member Roberto Calvi dead in a likely P2 assassination. The list's roster numbered 43 members of the Italian parliament, 3 cabinet ministers, the head and subheads of every major branch of the Italian military, Italy's top financiers and bankers, major media figures, and even future Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi. Gelli stated in 2003, in reference to Berlusconi, "All is becoming a reality, little by little, piece by piece. To be truthful, I should have had the copyright to it. Justice, TV, public order. I wrote Berlusconi's administration 30 years ago." Also figuring prominently on Gelli's list were noted members of the Gambino and Lucchese mafia syndicates. Yet, despite several, possibly hundreds of, unexplained deaths and disappearances, bribery and corruption charges, and known involvement with military takeovers in South America, the 95-year-old Gelli not only remains a free man to this day, but was nominated for a Nobel Prize in Literature in 1996 by none other than Mother Teresa of Calcutta. Bismarck, a 33rd degree Mason, helped annex and unify the outlying states of the German Confederation, paving the way for the Second Reich. Wilhelm I of Prussia, himself allegedly a 33rd degree Mason, during a series of bloody wars, including the Franco-Prussian War, eventually becoming the first elected Chancellor of Germany. Ironically, it was Wilhelm I's grandson, Wilhelm II's reign that helped usher in World War I, itself frequently implicated as being evidence of an Illuminati plot. It is known now that von Bismarck was granted the establishment of a Supreme German Council of Freemasonry by none other than Albert Pike. A fact that, in light of Pike's prophecies to Giuseppe Mazzini, makes the previous sentence all the more damning. Even the Ordo Templi Orientis, discussed in Chapter 2, was established in 1895 in Germany as an Academia Massonica by the Austrian chemist Karl Kellner, and Dr. Theodor Reuss, a singer, journalist, police informant, spy, and one-time lover of Karl Marx's daughter, Eleanor. It is known that Reuss made connections in Munich in 1880 with descendants of Weishaupt's original Bavarian Illuminati and received a charter to revive it. Indeed, one of the order's initial manifesto purports to teach the key to all the secrets of Freemasonry as well as those of sexual magic. And since numerous allegations of rape, the OTO is one of few Masonically derived bodies to allow an equal female presence. Assault and coercion, to speak nothing of mysterious deaths and known drug use, one wonders how to interpret those secrets. Chinese Freemasonry is officially banned by the People's Republic of China, although a Grand Lodge was formed in Taiwan in 1949 that is officially recognized by the United Grand Lodge of England. However, there are parallel routes in the emergence of mutual aid societies developing along mainland China in the 16th and 17th centuries, and it is quite probable that Freemasonry could have been established via trade routes in the country as early as the late 1700s. Regardless, the intermingling of Freemasonry with the new Chinese immigrant culture in the US began in the early 19th century with the rise of the East-West maritime trade and the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad. And by the 1870s, there were Chinese Masonic lodges meeting in various major metropolitan cities throughout the US. However, with the necessary emergence of the notorious triads of Chinese-American legend, themselves initially mutual aid societies devoted to aid Asian families either threatened by xenophobic sentiments or to assist in helping them settle abroad. During approximately the same time, by the 1940s, the migration of Chinese, Taiwanese, and Hong Kong natives took on a decidedly more criminally minded hue than merely the colorful customs of fraternal associations. Chinese Masonic lodges have been known to harbor high-level drug dealers and provide a blanket covering for extortion, gambling, prostitution, and counterfeiting activities, all safely camouflaged by the already secretive Masonic square and compass. There's no way of knowing how deep the extent of criminal syndicate infiltration with Masonic lodges is just yet, but according to police and FBI reports, it has been occurring widely since the 1970s, at the very least. As stated in the introduction, there's little reason to assume that all Freemasons are behind a single unified plan for global domination. In fact, few Masons even make it to the higher echelon. Most are content on enjoying a night out without their wives, dressed in outlandish costumes, referring to one another by exalted names and secret handshakes. A grown-up version of a treehouse club. Would these grown-up boys be so quick to knowingly address one another with a wink and a nod if they knew the true history and shadowy elements behind Freemasonry? I chose to omit some of the more outlandish accusations leveled against Freemasonry in this chapter, and instead chose to rely on verifiable facts. Not because there may not be justifiable basis in those accusations, but because the dedicated researcher would have an easier time trying to discern what goes on behind those closed doors if presented with concrete reality instead of opinionated fancy. The real danger in Freemasonry is not necessarily that of unmitigated evil lurking behind the sanctum sanctorum of your local Masonic lodge. No, the true danger is how quickly seemingly noble virtues can be denigrated to the spheres of greed, crime, bigotry, murder, and the corruption provided by unassailable power, and how quickly those virtues can be integrated into a schematic of control and domination on a global political and social scale, unless, of course, those noble virtues were simply part of that schematic all along. In addition to the previously mentioned parties in this chapter, known current and historical Freemasons have included Emperor of Mexico Agustin I, astronaut Edward Buzz Aldrin, French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte I, author Mark Twain, automotive pioneer Walter Chrysler, aviator Charles Lindbergh, poet Alexander Pope, actor Richard Pryor, Supreme Court Chief Justice Earl Warren, silent film director Louis B. Mayer, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, Turkish leader Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, escape artist Harry Houdini, Bolivian leader Simon Bolivar, silent film director Cecil B. DeMille, former Russian Tsar Alexander I, former presidents James Garfield, William McKinley and James Monroe, boxer Sugar Ray Robinson, King of Sweden and Norway Charles X, artist Marc Chagall, composer Felix Mendelssohn, British King William IV, author Arthur Conan Doyle, Bell Aircraft founder Lawrence Dale Bell, automobile pioneer Henry Ford, former presidents James K. Polk, Andrew Jackson and Calvin Coolidge, boxing promoter Don King, Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak, Chief Justice Earl Warren, Mount Rushmore sculptors and designers Gutzon and Lincoln Borglum, explorer Richard Francis Burton, former presidents Harry S. Truman and Theodore Roosevelt, American frontiersman Davy Crockett, Belgian King Leopold I, politician Bob Dole, philosopher Friedrich Schiller, Church of Mormon co-founder Joseph Smith, Revolutionary War General Benedict Arnold, Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall, British King Edward VIII, philosopher Johann Gottlieb Fichte, explorer Hiram Bingham, and former presidents Warren G. Harding and Lyndon B.